One of my favorite things about my sewing hobby is that my projects are constantly changing with the weather. Warmer weather means cute, pretty, light cotton dresses like this butterfly collar mini dress from Rosie's Patterns. This dress has a button front closure as well as a side invisible zipper. I like having the zipper in the side so I don't have to button and unbutton the front closure to wear the dress, but I still have a functional placket. But the invisible zipper is technically optional. There are also fitted princess seams, bias-bound armholes, and the statement collar piece. I've made this dress in a light and airy floral cotton, but any lightweight woven should be great. Sew along with me step by step, here we go. Place a front and side front piece right sides together along the princess seam and pin in place. Repeat for both sets of front and side front pieces. Now we'll sew our princess seams from the top to the bottom of the garment with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and finish those raw edges together. Then we'll press our seam allowances toward the side seam. We're going to repeat the exact same process to attach the back and side back pieces, placing them right sides together, pinning the princess seam, and repeating for the opposite set. Sew the princess seams on both sides from top to bottom, finish the raw edges together, then press those seam allowances toward their respective side seams. Place your back pieces right sides together and pin the center back seam. We're going to sew the center back seam from top to bottom with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, finish the raw edges together, and press the seam allowance to one side. Place your front and back dress pieces right sides together at the shoulder seams and pin in place. Sew the shoulder seams with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, finish the raw edges together, and press the seams toward the back. Here are the front and back pieces of my dress opened out at the shoulder seam. And here is my armhole. We're going to finish these raw edges of the armhole using 1/2 inch wide single fold bias tape. I've opened out the bias tape so that one folded edge is now pressed open. And I'm going to pin it along this curve of the armhole so that the outer raw edge aligns with the outer raw edge of the armhole. And I'll repeat to attach my bias tape right sides together to the opposite armhole. Now for both armholes, we're going to sew this bias tape in place along the outermost crease. This should be about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now we're going to fold the bias tape over the seam that we just created and over the seam allowance. And give that a good press. Now that I have that bias tape nicely pressed to the outside and we have a crisp seam there, we're going to turn the bias tape to the wrong side of the garment, right along that seam line. Give that a good press and pin. Note that as we press this bias tape to the wrong side, we're maintaining the opposite folded edge of the bias tape so that we have a clean finish. So here's the inside of the garment with my bias tape pinned to the inside along the folded edge. And I'm going to edge stitch along that inner folded edge from one side all the way around to the other. Now with my front and back pieces right sides together along one side seam only, I'm going to pin from top to bottom. Then I'll sew my side seam from the underarm to the bottom of the dress with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, finish the raw edges together, and press them toward the back of the garment. For the opposite side seam, we're going to be installing an invisible zipper. I'm going to finish the raw edges for both side seams separately. My invisible zipper is about 12 inches long. I'm going to open it up and use my fingers to fold open that coil and give them a light press. Now that my zipper coils are lightly pressed open, I'm going to place one zipper tape right sides together with one side seam, so that the outer edge of the zipper tape aligns with the finished edge of the side seam. And you want your top zipper stop to be about 1/4 inch below the finished edge of the armhole. Pin in place. Now I'll use my invisible zipper foot to sew the zipper tape in place, from the top to as close as I can get to the bottom of the zipper, sewing close to the zipper teeth. Now we have one zipper tape installed. We're going to follow the same process to attach the opposite zipper tape to the opposite side of the seam, placing the tape right sides together with the seam, aligning the edges, and placing that zipper stop once again the same distance as you did on the other side. Pin in place. Sew it in place with our invisible zipper foot in the same way as we did on the other side, sewing as close to the bottom as you can get. For the top of the zipper tapes that are extending beyond the finished edge of the armhole, I'm going to use pinking shears to clip off that excess so that they're flush with the finished edge of the armhole. Then I'll close my zipper. We're going to pin the remainder of the side seam from where our zipper stitches stopped to the bottom of the garment. To sew this section for the first few stitches, I'm going to use my zipper foot so that I can move the needle as close to the end of those stitches as possible. After those first few stitches, I'll change to my regular foot and continue with that 3/8 inch seam allowance to the bottom of the garment. Then press this seam open. Here is the wrong side of one of my center front edges. I've cut a strip of interfacing 1 1/8 inch wide and the same length as my center front. I'm going to align the raw edges and press that in place, repeating for the opposite center front edge. Now that I've fused my interfacings for both center fronts, I'm going to finish those raw edges from top to bottom for both sides. Along this indented portion where the placket will meet the edge of the collar, I'm going to draw myself a stitching guide for some stay stitching. Along the top raw edge of the placket, I'm going to draw a line that's 1/4 inch away from the raw edge. Then along the neckline edge, I'll draw a line that's 3/8 inch away from the raw edge so that the two lines meet. And these seam allowance lines are also marked on your pattern piece. Now I'm going to sew right on top of my drawn line, starting and stopping my stitching about 1 inch away from the bottom of the V on both sides. Repeat the same stay stitching for both sides of the center front. Then we're going to snip diagonally from the bottom of the V to the point of our stay stitching. Careful not to snip through the stitching line. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish the bottom raw edge of the dress from the bottom of the center front all the way along the bottom to the opposite bottom edge of the center front. Now with this center front edge finished, I'm going to fold this placket section to the right side so that the placket is right sides together with the bodice. This fold line from the pattern piece should be right along that inner edge of the interfacing. Pin along the top and bottom edges. Along the top edge, I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance right along my previous stay stitching, from the outer edge to the point of the stay stitching. Along the bottom edge, we're going to sew the placket section horizontally the width that you would like the final hem to be. I will be choosing a 5/8 of an inch hem here, so I'm going to sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance from the fold to the finishing stitches of the placket. Now I'll trim the bottom edge diagonally, and I'll also trim the interfaced portion only by about half. And I'll trim the top pointed edge as well. Then we'll turn this placket right side out. Give that a good press. So here's my placket with the finished edge pressed to the inside, and we're going to sew along our finishing stitches from the top to the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and hem the garment at this stage as well, folding and pressing the bottom finished edge to the wrong side by 5/8 of an inch all the way across from center front to center front. Now with that hem folded to the inside, we're going to sew from the outer folded edge of the placket along the finished edge of the hem to the opposite folded outer edge of the placket. Place your ruffle pieces right sides together along one short edge. Sew the short edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and press the seam open. Now with these two long pieces sewn together along one pair of short edges and the seam is pressed open, we'll fold this piece in half lengthwise, wrong sides together. And give that a good press all the way across. Now that our ruffle strip is folded in half from one side to the other, we're going to sew basting stitches from one short edge to the other. Use the longest stitch on your machine and leave thread tails on both ends. I'm going to be basting here with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then we'll pull one of the basting stitches on both sides to gather this ruffle, gathering very carefully so you don't break your thread. Now that we've gathered the ruffle piece, we want the raw edge of the ruffle to be placed along the outer curved edge of the collar. I'm going to first align the center seam of the ruffle with the center of my collar and pin in place right sides together. Then continue pinning in place along the curve, adjusting the gathers as necessary. And we want to place that short edge of the ruffle 3/8 of an inch away from the bottom edge of the collar. Continue to pin the entire ruffle to the collar edge. Now before I sew this in place, I'm going to take that short edge and undo a couple of stitches. Then tuck that raw edge to the inside by about a 1/4 of an inch. Now that I have a clean finish to that short edge, I'll edge stitch in place. Repeat that edge stitching for the short edge of the ruffle on both sides, then readjust the short edge so that it's still 3/8 of an inch away from the raw edge of the bottom of the collar. Now we're going to baste the raw edge of the ruffle to this single layer of the collar all the way around. I'm going to be basting with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Place your remaining collar piece right sides together with the sewn collar piece with a ruffle sandwiched in between. Pin in place along the curved edge. Sew the outer edges together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now we can turn our collar piece right side out and give the collar a good press. Place the raw edge of the outside layer of the collar right sides together with the neckline. We're just working with this single layer here. And we're going to start our pinning at the extension of the neckline seam allowance that we released earlier, aligning that outer finished edge of the collar with that seam allowance and pin in place. Continue pinning all the way around. Sew the single layer of collar to the neckline with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, from collar seam to collar seam. I've gone ahead and pressed the seam that we just created up toward the collar. And I've also pressed the remaining edge of the collar to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch. Now I'll place that pressed edge of the collar over the seam line and pin in place all the way across. Then we'll edge stitch that folded edge of the collar from one side all the way to the other. Mark your buttonholes onto the right placket. You can also use the markings from the pattern piece. We're going to be marking 6 buttonholes. Sew the buttonholes in place. Then we can sew our buttons in place on the left placket across from each buttonhole. And now your dress is complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. Subscribe to the channel for more full-length sewing tutorials, and I'll see you in the next video.